Yo, this is Trav with Yo Trav Sports Bag. I'm back at it again today with you, and you saw the thumbnail. Yo Trav's Sports Bag is bringing you some college football coverage. And as you saw in the thumbnail, we're live with the SEC and things. That's right, the SEC, the best conference in the entire country, and they've done it for several years. Why not? And then others kind of piece on the way. But I'm here for the game that just ended. So without further ado, let's get into that. Yeah, I'm back. Once again, I'm Trav, and this is Yo Trav Sports Bag. And of course, this show, a live stream, of course. If you've seen any of my other videos, they've been recorded. But as of late, I've got into the live screening or live streaming world. And this show from Yo Trav Sports Bag is we're live, the SEC and things. And of course, today is Saturday, and the biggest game that was played so far today, it was scheduled for a while. Alabama, after a little bit of turmoil, was able to pull it out against Arkansas, and they were able to pull off the win. 49-26, I believe. What is it? 49-26, somewhere around it. Either way, they were able to pull it off, and it was something to behold because there was a lot of ebb and flow in the game. I think they were a 17-point favorite going into the game. Arkansas, well, they didn't have much of a chance, at least going into the game, but a lot of Arkansas fans and a lot of Alabama fans or a lot of Alabama haters, they were hoping that they lost the game. Going into this game, Alabama was, well, on a streak. They were beating up teams. They just won last week, just blowing out teams. And this time it's an SEC game. This time, this game was supposed to mean something. It was on the road in Arkansas. Everybody was ready with the Razorbacks, and Alabama pulled it off. But it wasn't without adversity. And that adversity came, as we all know now, at the end of the game with Bryce Young, last year's Heisman Trophy winner, the starting quarterback for Alabama, and a real Heisman Trophy candidate for this year. I don't know what Gary Danielson was talking about, saying that this is the game that's probably, or last week's game was probably the game that catapulted Bryce Young into the Heisman Trophy candidacy. What? I thought the game against Texas, even though the numbers weren't gaudy, they would not have won that game without him specifically. He drove them down there. He was able to ignore the drop passes. He was able to keep the confidence in his coaches and his players who were dropping the passes, and he won the game for them in Texas. It was a hostile environment, a lot like today against Arkansas, a very hostile environment with real implications because it is part of the SEC West. And he went down with an injury after being up 14-0. It looked like it was going to be another blowout for Alabama. And that did not happen because when he went down, freshman quarterback Jalen Milroe came in. And he's not the passer that Jalen Hurts, he's not the passer that Bryce Young is. Not even Jalen Hurts at this point. But he's not the passer that Bryce Young is, and he wasn't able to move the team the way Bryce Young does because Bryce could do a little bit of running, even though his primary game is based on passing the ball, which he does, and he does well. And he could give you that balance of being able to be a threat as a runner and then still being able to pass the ball and finding the open receiver. We saw that last year, and we've seen it in the early going, even with the drop passes. But Milroe comes in there and he does his part. He throws the ball, not that accurately, but he does it timely. And when he did it timely, he was also able to mix in the run. And as we saw later in the game, he was able to break that big 77-yard run. He did not get the touchdown, but he was able to make sure that he was a threat that way, and he got Alabama back into the game and ultimately was a big key to them winning this game. I mean, Alabama was 25-7 heading into this game against Arkansas. So all the numbers kind of seem like they played themselves out with Arkansas being a 17-point underdog. You know, you would think with the home field advantage and it being Alabama and teams typically giving Alabama their best shot, you thought this would be something that had upset written all over it. And as we have saw in the game, well, upset could have been written all over it because Arkansas needed something catastrophic to happen, and it did. Bryce Young went out of the game with an injury, a shoulder injury. He did not return. But depth matters in college football. Recruiting matters in college football. And there's only a lucky few teams. And I believe it's Alabama. I believe that it's Georgia. I believe it's Ohio State. And then there's another level after that of teams that can bring in those 5-star players who back up 5-star players, and the 4-star players who probably were missed at 5 stars, they replace the 5-star players as well when they're injured. And this is pretty much what happened with Alabama, bringing in Jalen Milroe, who, even though his passing game isn't down right now, just like Jalen Hurts' passing game wasn't down at the moment when he first got into Alabama, we saw it progressively get better. Even Mac Jones, when he got in his opportunities behind Tua, he did not look good until he got some time and opportunity in the games and blowouts. And Nick Saban gave him that opportunity to refine his game. And when it was time to go in his last year at Alabama, well, he shined and was a Heisman Trophy candidate and ultimately a first-round draft pick. But to this game, there was a lot to be desired in this game from Alabama, because we wanted to know, now that SEC play is in play, what were they really all about? We hear fans of Alabama or fans who are who of other teams who do not like Alabama, or anti-SEC fans talking about Alabama being overrated because of what had happened in Austin, Texas earlier this year. And there's somewhat of an argument to be made. It was the first game of the season. You can just say what you want, but you know how fans are. They're going to run with whatever they can run with, regardless of how much sense it makes. They're going with emotions, and fans do that, and that's what they're supposed to do. But in this regard, Alabama, I think, is on the level with Georgia. The reason why I say I think, because Georgia had already beaten them in the national championship game, even though, they did lose to them in the SEC championship game. But Alabama, man for man, I think Georgia's the only team that can really compete with them. And I think Ohio State has somewhat of an argument to get in there and do the same, because they're kind of dominating the Big Ten now, and they've already beaten up Notre Dame, but now everybody's beating up on Notre Dame these days. But Alabama, this was a game that was going to show if they were good, if they were far removed from what happened in Texas, because this was a road game, this was an SEC backdrop, and to see how things was going to go. And to top it off, they lost their quarterback, and they had to rely on that depth, all of that excellent recruiting, and those selective picks from the transfer portal. And they were able to do it, and they looked very good doing it. And we saw why the scoring had stopped, not only because of the young quarterback coming in, but we saw how when you lose your leader, your Heisman Trophy quarterback from last year, who's been leading your team to an undefeated season so far this year, I could see how you could lose a little bit of winning your sales, not knowing what's going on. He was in the injury tent for a little while, the medical tent for a little while. Then he went to the locker room holding his shoulder. He came back out smiling and looked like he might have taken some aspirin. He might have been able to come out on the field, but I think that was more psychological. He never got back into the game. When they get back to Tuscaloosa, I'm sure there's going to be further evaluation, and there's some tough games coming up for them in the SEC, rivalry games especially, with Tennessee especially. And, we're going to find out what happened with him. But the depth that Alabama had, those guys, regardless of the talent, they felt it, and you saw it in the way they played. And it did give Arkansas some hope believing that, this is football. And that's one thing that fans kind of forget, or they do remember, but they don't want to know, that everyone isn't going to have the perfect staff. Everyone isn't going to have the perfect roster throughout the entire season. There's going to be injuries. This is a very physical game. This is an SEC game, which makes it even more physical. But this is a game that is based on collisions, man, concussions, and real big injuries could happen in college football, or any kind of football for that matter, but on the highest levels, which the SEC is, at least in the college ranks. That's what happens. And Alabama was able to overcome this. So I can see how the team kind of felt down, but when they got their bearings about them, the depth played a role. They overpowered Arkansas with their recruiting. Let me repeat, they overpowered Arkansas with their recruiting. They were just the better team. Wave after wave of talented players in that game was the reason why they were able to go on the road and beat Arkansas the way they did, even though Arkansas came right back. I think it was a 23-0 rush they came on in terms of points, because of the Jalen, why do I keep calling him Jalen Hurts? Because of the Bryce Young injury. And they were able to bounce back from that, hold the fort, weather the storm, and then the depth had taken over. So that's something that we know about Alabama. They've done it in the past, but I don't think they've done it to this extent because the injuries just seem to keep coming. But the players they have in place, these 5-star guys, these potential first-round draft picks or these potential first picks overall, in Will Anderson's case, they step up when they need to. Will Anderson has not been as dominant as you probably thought he would be going into the season, but it seems every time there's a big play needed, he shows up with a big play. He did it today against Arkansas. He did it against Texas when they needed a big play. He made previous boneheaded plays and in some cases kind of disappeared, but he made his play when they needed it. And Jalen, why do I keep saying Jalen? What's up with me? But anyway, and Bryce Young was able to take it home and win the game, get out of Austin with a win, a controversial win, but there isn't an asterisk by the win. They were able to win it. And now today, a lot of the same thing. He was disruptive. He was the cause of other players making plays, but on the stat sheet, you didn't see another sack, another sack, another sack. I think he did get one sack, but he didn't, he wasn't playing like you probably would think a Will Anderson would play, kind of like Jadeveon Clowney when he was at South Carolina. He was like a dominant force every time he played. So, and it was noticeable. So that's another huge thing right there. And, of course, I would be remiss if I didn't mention Jahmyr Gibbs. Even though the quarterback situation was the news and is the news, you have players like Jahmyr Gibbs who comes in and just absolutely destroys the competition. He completely makes the playing field imbalanced with Alabama rising and Arkansas going down. He could break your back, and he had done it 2 times. I mean, he was phenomenal today. 72 yards on one run, 76 yards on another run. I mean, he just put up a fantastic day, over 200 yards rushing, over 11 yards per carry. And then, every time this guy touches the ball in whatever capacity, you could flex him out as a wide receiver. He's making it happen there. You already know what he does in the backfield. You want to put him on kickoff return, punt return. This guy, he's going to be something else on the next level, but right now he's a whole bunch of trouble. He was at Georgia Tech, of course. And while at Georgia Tech, he was a dynamic player there as well, especially on special teams. He ran kickoffs back there. He had one for touchdown there in the 2 seasons he was at Georgia Tech. And he decided to leave the dumpster fire, which was or still is Georgia Tech. And Jeff Collins, was fired recently. So we see why he left. And he was able to bring his wares to Alabama. And we're seeing firsthand the type of player he is. In fact, over the years, I've watched Alabama football now. I'm not an Alabama fan, but I've always admired great football. So whether Alabama's a great football team now or Georgia was a great football team last year with their 15 draft picks, with all of those first rounders coming on their defense, or even LSU not too long ago, I go back with SEC football. My best team, my favorite team is not even in the SEC. I just respect the hell out of the SEC because of the quality of play. And that's why I say it is the best conference in all of college football. And I go back to the last time I think I saw a player who was so diverse and meant so much to the team, and it was David Palmer from Alabama, from Birmingham, the Deuce, number 2. I remember him running the kickoffs, running the punts, catching virtually everything that was passed his way. And I also remember when Jay Barker had gone down in one game against Tennessee, he came in as the quarterback, and Tennessee was able to get a tie out of it, but you had your receiver, your slash punt returner, your slash kickoff returner, your slash running back now playing quarterback, which he did a lot of when he was in high school. And, he was dynamic. And this is what I see with Jahmyr Gibbs. You could put him anywhere now. I don't think he'll be needed as a quarterback at any time because Alabama's recruiting has just been off the charts. They have a quarterback somewhere. If Murrow can't push the envelope, they have a quarterback somewhere who can step in and give them something. And you could just leave the players who are there for what they're supposed to do exactly what they are supposed to do. And it's just something else after the first quarter, because this is kind of give you a little perspective of before Bryce Young. Yes, before Bryce Young had gone out, how dominant Alabama was and how Vegas looked like they had gotten it completely right with their 17-point favorite in the beginning. In fact, they might have gotten it much more than right. When we look at how Alabama, after the first quarter, they were up in yardage, 215 to 52. That's quite a bit of yardage, and it showed the absolute domination. The crowd was taken completely out of the game, and it took something like Bryce Young getting injured for them to get into the game, because it seems like they started getting a little bit of momentum themselves. In fact, a lot of momentum. Before the previous 4 games, Arkansas coming out of the half, because they were down at halftime 28-7. They were pretty bad coming out of the locker room in the third quarter. I think they only scored 17 points in the third quarter this whole season up until this point. And I guess because of the Bryce Young injury and then scoring a few points and getting that crowd into it and getting a little bit of momentum, they were able to come out and score 16 points and make it very interesting. They got the crowd right back into it. But then again, as I've already mentioned, they were overpowered by the man-to-man recruiting and the depth of Alabama, which is the man-to-man recruiting. And look, Alabama, they go to the transfer portal, and it's like a lottery for these players who end up going to Alabama from one of these schools, because you have to be one of the best in order to get the opportunity there. I mean, you can come from be the best player in the Mountain West, and you're probably going to be 3rd or 4th string at Alabama. That's just the way it is. So you got to be a really, really dynamic player, as we've already seen with Jahmyr Gibbs coming from Georgia Tech. And he had a chance on the great stage that he was on today to just show what he was all about. He's done it before that. I mean, Kool-Aid McKinstry, another one. He's not a transfer, but these are the types of players that Alabama is getting. Alabama's absolutely the Pied Piper. Top players come to them. Nick Saban just plays his flute, and everyone who wants to be someone or thinks they're someone, top player, it seems as if they want to go to him. Now, he's losing a little bit of that because Kirby Smart, with his championship at Georgia after 41 years, is now becoming that kind of guy. And he is a Nick Saban disciple, so he knows how it's done. And players are coming there as well. And it seems like we're waiting with a collision course for Alabama and Georgia to get together. But, I need to stop getting off track, because we got to talk about this game. This is a recap, but I had to give a little bit of background. And Arkansas is a good team. They lost last week to Texas A&M. It surprised me, because I don't think Texas A&M was that good a team. And of course, they lost themselves today to Ole Miss, and Ole Miss obviously is a very good team. And no, actually not Ole Miss. They lost to Mississippi State. Kentucky lost to Ole Miss, so Ole Miss is a very good team. I thought Mississippi State would beat LSU, but I was wrong there. But in any event, KJ Jefferson, the quarterback for Arkansas, how should I put this? I think he's a solid quarterback, but he's another Anthony Richardson to me from Florida. He's a running quarterback who's more of a runner than a passer. When defenses get a little bit hip to his game passing wise, he's going to run. He's going to go to his first read. He's not going to go through his progressions often with consistency. He's going to run. I'm not going to compare him to Lamar Jackson, because Lamar Jackson did a lot of that, but he was much more dynamic than those two when he was at Louisville, playing against lesser competition at Louisville than you would get in the SEC. In fact, Lamar Jackson, in his last game at the Tax-Slayer Bowl in Jacksonville, he threw 3 or 4 picks against Mississippi State. So the talent, and he was able to go to the NFL draft and still get drafted in the first round. So the talent that he played against in the ACC, he played against Florida State. He dominated them that year. I think he did it 2 years in a row. So he played on the level, and he's proven right now he could play in the NFL. Still has a little problem reading defenses, but hey, he got a Player of the Year award. So apparently he's good enough. But KJ Jefferson reminds me of Anthony Richardson of the Florida Gators, who's just a running quarterback. That's it. There isn't really any nuance to them. When all else fails, they just run. Or when they can't get the read right away, they just run. And whether they can run or not, it doesn't even matter. They're going to try to force their way in. And I always say, kind of like jokingly, matter of fact, completely jokingly, you cannot halfback option yourself to the victory. And we saw that today with KJ, and we've seen it already with Anthony Richardson of Florida. You cannot, against good teams, halfback option yourself to victory. And Bryce Young is not that kind of a player. He could pass the ball. He could go through his progressions. Yes, he has time because he has a better offensive line, but he's done it now going on 2 seasons, and hopefully the injury isn't that bad to where he can continue doing what he's doing. You know, I can't say it enough how much Arkansas was overwhelmed by depth and how much recruiting matters. And you saw the differences as the game went on, and home field advantage didn't mean much of anything. And in Arkansas just couldn't hold up their end of the bargain. I don't think they even had an end of the bargain. I just think they just simply weren't good enough, and the better team won, which it was supposed to. And regardless of the trials that Alabama had in this game, it didn't matter. They just the better team. And I can go on and on about. It's almost like I don't have to really mention what happened with Arkansas, because the reason why it happened is because of Bryce Young not playing. If he continued to play, there's no telling that 50, 60 points could have been on the board, and the defense would have stayed inspired. They might have gotten a little bored after a while, but it could have been a lot worse. The overall domination. And it brings me to, can you look at this game and really get a gauge of how good Alabama is? And yes, I can. And whereas we really couldn't get a real good gauge of how good Georgia was, we thought that Oregon was better than what they were, and Georgia just completely got rid of them. And Georgia went on to win a lot of games, win some games, and doing it convincingly until they had Kent State. Look, the Kent State game, almost every very good team or even great team has their little game. These are kids, remember. Whether you're a transfer portal or even a redshirt senior, you're still pretty much a kid, 22, 23 years old, probably at the max. But generally speaking, the majority of the roster is probably 19, 20, probably 21. That's still pretty young. Those are kids. And your emotions are still not intact. So I can see how it can go up and how you can go down when it comes to the players or comes to the games. You could say, I really want to dominate this team. And, in the back of your mind, you're looking at bigger and better things. And that's probably what happened to Georgia. Look, they won by 17 points. The stat sheet showed you how much they were dominant. If you watched the game, you saw how sloppy it was. And that's going to happen. I remember outside of football, basketball years ago, when UNLV had that excellent team. And they had trouble with Ball State. You know what I mean? So they had trouble with Ball State. And this was one of the best basketball teams ever. And so it happens in football. Your emotions go down a little bit. You can't keep it up. And then, you get up for the games you need to get up for. If they had to play Alabama, trust me, it's going to be refined a lot better than it looked against Kent State. But now Alabama's had their tough game. Next week, Auburn and Georgia are going to have their game, even though Auburn is not as good as they usually are. And they have a lot of turmoil going over there. But, and this is the oldest rivalry in the South, Georgia and Auburn. And there's something to be said about a rivalry, but I think Georgia is going to be ready. They're playing Missouri today. I'm not expecting a big game later on today between those two. I don't expect Missouri to pose too much of a threat. But we're going to see now, because Georgia had a chance to watch Alabama, or at least hear about Alabama and what they had done against Arkansas. These are kids, and they're competitive. They're ultra competitive. They're going to try to one-up what Alabama had done. Even though Missouri is not Arkansas, they're going to still try to one-up what Alabama had done. I don't think Georgia's going to fall from the number 1 ranking. Alabama made an argument for why they should be number 1, even though there was a little lull in the action. Either way, these two will ultimately get together. I think they'll both be undefeated when they get together, depending on Bryce Young's health, because this Tennessee team is looking better. Now, I don't think they're elite just yet. They're going in the right direction, but they're playing really well right now. And that element of rivalry still matters when you have Alabama and Tennessee. It's not the same as Alabama and Auburn, but Alabama, Tennessee, that border war is real. And I can see something possibly going awry if Bryce Young isn't there. And full health. And after the way he had left, he came back smiling, but you could put a happy face on television. It doesn't mean that things are okay. He probably took some aspirin just to get the pain to go away. I'm hoping it's not a huge injury. I hope it's not an injury at all, because you want to see teams at their best playing other teams that are at their best. You don't want to have the stories or excuses or rumors that we had last season during the national championship game when every Alabama fan told you about Jameson, Jameson Williams, and all of these other injuries they had. If we had our receivers, no one cares about woulda, shoulda, coulda, how. This is football. Most players aren't 100% by the time they even get to a bowl game or championship game. That's in NFL. It's the same thing. On Super Bowl Sunday, everyone has a nick or bruise and not at 100% as they were probably in August when training camp was in full swing. But nevertheless, Alabama, to me at least, they proved that they're a pretty doggone good team. I mean, they did it before this. I don't think there was any really a question whether they were a good team or a great team. They're a very, very good team. I don't think we have great teams anymore. We might have a great segment of a team, like a great defense like Georgia had last year. But Alabama's very good. And I think right now, Georgia is very good. And the only way we could find out if they're great is when they play one another. Because I don't think what's left in front of them, if everyone is healthy, is going to decide how good or great a team is. And so, once again, this is a live stream. So if you want to join in the chat, go ahead and join in the chat. I'm doing all this multitasking right now to see if we have any comments and whatnot. And so far, no good, but that's okay. You can watch this broadcast a little later. I'm going to try to do this kind of show after big games or games that are perceived to be big. The SEC and things. That's what it's called, because we're going to talk a little bit about the SEC. This was a lot about the SEC. This is the best conference. I don't think anyone can tell you otherwise when you look at where the championships have come from, the SEC. Even though Alabama's gotten a lot of them, but there's been 4 different teams over the past several years who've also partaken in championship football, home rings and have trophies. So we go with the SEC, and we'll throw in other teams that actually do matter as well. But I thought I'll break down a little bit of that Alabama, a lot of that Alabama thing. If you can see right now, I've gone 27 minutes on this rant. Like this channel if you like what you're hearing. Don't like this channel if you don't like what you're hearing. It's just that simple. At 27 minutes, you've gotten here this long. Well, you like something. Or if you just came in, you might not like me yet, but hey, that's to be determined. So the things part of it is the SEC part of it still is the other teams that played in the SEC. And we'll just kind of brush through that right now. We'll get a little bit more in depth on another episode as I continue to do this. And that's the game on Thursday. South Carolina playing South Carolina State. They beat them up. They're supposed to beat them up. Interstate rivalry. No, there's no rivalry. They just happen to be in the same state. One is an HBCU, historically black college university, they're the defending black college champions from last year when they beat Jackson State, Coach Prime, all that stuff from the SWAC. Yeah, themselves, they were destroyed. I think they have one win at 1-3 right now. They just got destroyed by South Carolina, and they had gotten $500,000 for the destruction. So they were paid $500,000. In fact, the University of South Carolina paid $3.35 million to out-of-conference teams this year, for the right to, play them at home, host them, and kind of get the easy win. Teams do that to kind of gel and get themselves together before conference play starts. And this is one of those games. So it helped South Carolina, of course, because these HBCUs always have issues with finances. It seems like almost all the time. Things are getting better now because more people are jumping on board. And I think a lot of it also has to do with Deion Sanders and what he's been doing at Jackson State, bringing attention and bringing bigger and better recruits to Jackson State. I don't know how long he's going to be there, but while he's there, there are some eyes on HBCU football, at least on the FCS level, not a Division II level. The Virginia States and the Union States and those kind of teams, Fayetteville State. Not too many people watching that right now. But as I sit here right now, I'll talk to you about the South Carolina beating up on South Carolina State on Thursday, 55-10, paying that $500,000. We look at Ole Miss beating up on Kentucky today, 22-19. And I remember hearing that Kentucky was exposed. No, they weren't exposed. They just got beaten by a better team. Exposed is blowing teams out and looking formidable. And then when you're playing anybody, you just lose. They were on the road for this game. Rodriguez just came back. Chris Rodriguez just came back. His first game back. And Ole Miss is good. That's probably a dark horse team. I thought Mississippi State would be too. But Ole Miss is a dark horse team. Lane Kiffin has those boys playing some ball. Are they a threat to Alabama? Are they a threat in the SEC period? It's to be determined, but as it stands right now, as they continue to go, they're undefeated, and they've been looking impressive, and they were able to beat a very good team that people were calling very good in Kentucky. They took care of that business, and now they moved on. And then Texas A&M took on Mississippi State, and Texas A&M was beaten in that game. And the irony for me is Texas A&M just isn't as good as the numbers say as far as their ranking goes. They're not that good. They're going to be solid, but in the SEC, solid doesn't cut it. That might work somewhere else, but it doesn't cut it. And Texas A&M, they struggled against Miami before we found out Miami wasn't as good as we thought, because Miami ended up losing at home against Middle Tennessee State. Now, I know because you beat this team doesn't mean you're going to beat that team, because Kent State gave Georgia some problems last week, and they ended up getting beat themselves today at home against, I think, another MAC team. So that kind of lets you know that. But the deal is, Texas A&M, I think people are looking at their recruiting class from last year, the best recruiting class they've ever had, and they're using that to tease them this time when these players haven't really made their impact yet. They hadn't gotten out there and played the entire class, or at least the best players in that class haven't played yet. You have to look a little bit further into the future. If Jimbo's still there, if he keeps this nonsense up, there's going to be a problem. But Texas A&M will be fine, but right now they just aren't. And Mississippi State was able to handle them today. And so we move on from there. And now we can talk a little bit about the things. And I've mentioned also about Georgia playing Missouri tonight. And then there are other games out there, in the ACC. Those are the things, other things that aren't in the ACC. Florida State lost to Wake Forest today, which I'm not that surprised. Wake Forest, if you can't stop them offensively, they're ridiculous offensively. They did it to Clemson and lost the game last week, but offensively, they're a very good team. And keep your eye on them, even though they did lose. They're going to be formidable in the ACC right now. And you have Clemson playing North Carolina State. This is one of those years where the ranking really doesn't matter, because I think there's a number of teams in the SEC that could beat either team right now. Clemson having quarterback issues right now, and obviously their secondary is getting toasted the way they did last week against Wake Forest. And North Carolina State, you're talking about fool's gold. We'll find out by the time this day or night is over. And so we'll move on from there and talk about the Big Ten. Just a little bit of Big Ten news. Michigan beat Iowa 27-14. They went to Iowa and defeated them. And they held Iowa, who's a running team, down to below 70 yards for the game. Michigan sneakily is playing very good football. They're ranked number 4, so they're getting some notoriety. But I think people are still looking at Ohio State a lot more than they're looking at Michigan right now. But Michigan is, and I think with J.J. McCarthy, who I thought was the right choice at quarterback, deserves to be the quarterback. He still needs to learn how to pass, but his athleticism, along with the running game they already have, I think that really helps out that team, and it's proving it. And Ohio State, rightfully number 3, and you know what? They can make moves if someone stumbles at the top 2. They beat Rutgers. They had a slow start, but ultimately they win at the Horseshoe, 49-10. And then Penn State and Northwestern. Penn State beats Northwestern 17-7. And I say that to say this. Northwestern is not on Penn State's level. Penn State is an elite team, an elite Big Ten team, an elite college football team. I say that to let you know what I said earlier. These kids, they play down to the competition sometimes because they just can't stay up emotionally from week to week. And you play a team like Northwestern, even though they are a fellow Big Ten team, you just don't get up for it. Northwestern was not supposed to be good this year. And, they haven't been anything special, and Penn State has. And they struggled 17-7. So it kind of looks back at what happened with Georgia, having their problems last week against Kent State. And it goes back to looking at Alabama having their issue with Texas. Now, Texas has better athletes, but they just are doing their thing because they lost to Texas Tech themselves last week, too. I thought the competition they gave Alabama would catapult them to no problem in the Big 12, which they will only be there for the next couple of years before they come into the SEC. And Oklahoma getting blown out. I mean, absolutely blown out. Over 600 yards of offense from TCU against Oklahoma. And over 300 yards of that was on the ground. I mean, Oklahoma thinks they're ready for the SEC. Houston, we have a problem, a serious problem. If they do decide to come to them, well, they're coming. It doesn't matter. They're coming. But they're going to catch a beat in Texas, too. And they'll get caught up to speed. I think everything will be all right once they get in and settle in the SEC. Missouri had their little time in the SEC. Texas A&M's had their intermittent success in the SEC. I think Texas and Oklahoma, they're going to come in, but I don't think they're going to jump over Georgia. I don't think they're going to jump over Alabama, obviously. And even Florida now kind of somewhat on the rise, give the coach a couple of more years and bring in those Florida blue chippers, so, and there's other teams. Like Auburn, I think they're getting rid of their coach, might bring in Deion Sanders. I don't know, but we'll see that as well. Wow, it's been 35 minutes and I freaking rambled on this much. Hit the thumbs up, subscribe to the channel. But I wanted to get those things out there because, one thing, a little pet project of mine. I like football of all kinds. I like sports of all kinds. This is a sports channel. I'm just able to talk a little bit of college football right now because, well, a big game just ended, and it was big for a little while until it wasn't. And UNLV 4-1. 4-1 UNLV. This is the team that lost to an HBCU just a few years ago. Howard University. They're 4-1 now. They just beat New Mexico this past, I think, Friday. And hey, that's good news. These guys, I don't believe they've won a bowl game since 2000. Was it 3 or 2002? I think they played Arkansas. I don't know. But either way, they had Jason Thomas. I remember that. He was the quarterback that was there. He was very freaking good. He was a transfer from USC. He could run the ball really well. He could pass fairly well. He had a strong arm. I thought an NFL coach could bring the best out of him, and it didn't happen. But either way, I want to give a shout out to UNLV because they've been taking some guff for decades, seriously, decades right now. So I want to throw that out there as well. So with that all said, I'm Trav with your Trav Sports Bag, and this is my live with the SEC and Things segment. Until next time.